Greetings and welcome to Diplomacy in Action. I'm Dike Rostant. We are very happy to have a conversation with the 78th President of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Dennis Francis. And Your Excellency, thank you for making the time. Welcome once again to Trinidad and Tobago. I want to start the conversation though asking, what has it been like from June 1, 2023 to today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be home. What has it been like? Well, I think it's been quite literally a roller coaster. The job of President of the General Assembly is multifaceted. Basically, it's sort of the equivalent of being Speaker of the House, but with some additional things added on. And since I've taken the office in September of last year, it's really been a fast-moving, extremely demanding, hypersensitive period. Because as you know, our world is changing very fast before our eyes. And these issues, most of them, end up on the floor of the United Nations in the General Assembly. So it's been very stimulating, extraordinarily demanding, sometimes frustrating. But the frustration really is an indication of the diversity that exists in the world.
And that's one of the things I wanted to ask in terms of, it's one thing to be representing Trinidad and Tobago. It's another thing to have this unbiased, impartial, objective responsibility where these diverse range of issues make it to the floor. What are some of those, what are your thoughts on leading the session and helping to try to navigate some of these diverse topics and issues?
Well, as you know, Trinidadians are known to have a great sense of right and wrong and are never intimidated about expressing it. You hear it in the talk shows when people call the radio stations. They have a point of view. No, I do not sit as President of the General Assembly as the permanent representative of Trinidad and Tobago. I vested myself of that role, because the president has to be equidistant from all of the partners, all of the members. The president's view has to reflect the views of the members. And yes, the diversity is there. The richness of it is what makes the UN partly such a compelling organization, because it is in that richness that you get the options and the possibilities for problem solving and for shaping outcomes that resonate transculturally, so that everyone can feel comfortable under the umbrella. But coming from a small developing country and coming from Trinidad and Tobago, as you know, we are as cosmopolitan can be, really has allowed me to be able to move with confidence between the various groups and organizations. I had a telephone call some months ago with the permanent representative of Israel, and we were talking about the situation, and he said to me, no, Dennis, we have no problem. We love you, he said. But after I have that conversation, I go meet with the Palestinian permanent observer, and they express their appreciation for the manner in which the office is conducting itself in relation to the issue of Palestine. That is an indication that the office is conducting itself in precisely the way it's supposed to. In a non-judgmental way, equidistant from the partners, totally objective, because at the end of the day, it is the members who will decide. The President of the General Assembly does not decide. He or she guides, he or she highlights, but never decides, except as it is a matter relating to the rules of procedure.
No, I like the fact that you speak of yourself and you also speak of the office being equidistant. Uh, the fact that you also spoke about the cosmopolitan nature of Trinidad and Tobago, uh, and that is a positive. Are there any things that sometimes may feel as though they're challenges because of where you are from? And if so, how do you deal with them?
No, no, because when you sit in this position, you're there to represent the broad views of the membership and to make decisions in a manner that would bring the membership together. So you're constantly trying to find ways of finding common ground, of bridging the gaps, of making people feel comfortable so that they can join the consensus. And that is not a matter of geography or of size. It really is a matter of creativity, being flexible, being able to engage open and honestly with counterparts, and being able to earn their respect and being able to respect them and make them feel respected. So that is a problem that we do not have in this country. We have our differences, but we are in each other's festivals. We enjoy each other's culture, each other's food. We live on a small island, and therefore we found ways of working and living together in order to preserve the harmony of the country. And that's something that has prepared me well for the role of being sometimes an arbiter between the different cultural and religious strands that comprise the international community.
And you started checking off some of those boxes and talking about respect, being able to have this level of tolerance. And I'm just saying, okay, well, these are things I see directly how they can translate into being from Trinidad and Tobago. So thank you for that. But even looking at the years of service, the greater part of 2 decades, how has the role of diplomacy changed over that time? Is it the tools of the trade? Is it how you approach people? Principles remain the same? What are some of those things that you've seen over that arc of your service?
But it isn't quite so much that diplomacy has changed. The role of diplomacy fundamentally remains the same. But what has changed to a significant degree is the methods and the methodologies. Technology is a huge factor in this. And particularly now, with social media, etc., coming into play, technology makes us more efficient, but it also creates challenges. Because of the speed with which information is disseminated around the world, there's information that is good information, solid information, but information that is also destructive, manipulative, disinformation and misinformation. This creates challenges for governance generally, including for global governance, because it helps to shape public opinion. And if that opinion is based on images or impressions that do not exist, that can be extremely problematic to recover from. So technology has been one factor. Another factor has been the fact that you now have new issues in diplomacy that 20 years ago did not exist. 40, 50 years ago, diplomacy was to a significant degree about power and development. It's still about those things, but now you have issues like biodiversity loss that did not exist 25 years ago. You have health diplomacy. You have the occurrence, and the science tells us that there will be an increase in pandemics. Now, bear in mind that at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, issues arose around who had access to the vaccine. There are places in Africa where less than 4% of the population had been inoculated, whereas there are parts of the world where vaccines had been bought up, overstocked, the expiry dates passed, and then they had to be dumped because countries were trying to protect their populations. So all of this has sort of come together to create new challenges for diplomacy, new expertise, actually, to deal with some of these issues. It's no longer possible for someone who's a specialist in political science to navigate the scientific foundations of these things. You need experts in the field to advise you, because in most cases, the outcomes will be a function of the science. And of course, you have climate change and sea level rise. These things did not exist as we know them now 30, 40 years ago. So the world is changing, the environment has changed, and the context has changed, because we've moved from a world where the Cold War was hot up until 1990, when the Berlin Wall fell, to a world now where there are multiple powers of center and power has shifted east. So you've got the Chinas of this world, the Indias of this world, the Vietnams of this world, the Malaysias, countries coming of age and asserting themselves regionally, and sometimes in ways that challenge the dominance of traditionally powerful countries.
Is it a matter of facilitating conversations and then making sure that the office remains objective? What is the method of deciding what gets discussed? And I ask that looking at buttons with the SDGs, looking at your pin with the 1.5 to stay alive, and you just would have spoken about climate warming or climate change and sea level warming. How do you go about doing that while still maintaining that equidistance, that objectivity, and that level of fairness?
It's an interesting question. The President of the General Assembly does have some power to influence the agenda of the General Assembly. But the working method involves consultation with the members. Members have a contribution to make in terms of determining what gets onto the agenda. Because for every item that gets on, there's probably 2 or 3 that does not get on. Inevitably, in an organization of 193 member states, one would expect that there would be a high demand from virtually all members to have issues that resonate with them and most relevant to them on the agenda. But those discussions, those consultations take place ahead of time. And the agenda, the draft provisional agenda of the United Nations is circulated virtually a year in advance. So we know this is how we plan to spend the year, the time for the year. Now, but sometimes unexpected things happen, and they can be so important and have such a dramatic effect on the system that they need to be incorporated into the agenda. And of course, provision is made for that. So that, for example, Gaza, you would not see Gaza on the agenda of the UN for this year when we issued the draft provisional agenda. It came onto the agenda, of course, because it could not and should not have been ignored, and has not been ignored, but it was not anticipated that this was going to be the case.
You spoke about consultants, having advisors, speaking with subject matter experts. What is the significance or the importance of sharing that knowledge? And this may be on a mentorship level. This may be through publications because you've been involved in that as well. How important is it that the people who come after to do this work, to give this service, aren't starting from a level that is not necessarily zero, but they could have been a little further along or higher along
Yes.
if there was that knowledge transfer?
It's a very important question, actually, more important than you realize. Because as much as the office of the President of the General Assembly is an institutionalized office, it is there permanently. And mind you, it is the only elected office in leadership at the UN. The distinction is made between the office of the President of the General Assembly and the office of the Secretary General, which is the executive wing of the Secretariat. But the Secretariat is appointed, not elected. He's appointed by the membership. When a new president of the General Assembly takes office, there is very little in the way of documentation to guide him or her. This has apparently been problematic because I've had those conversations with previous presidents of the General Assembly. But for the first time this year, we've decided to do something about it. And in fact, my staff is in the final stages now of creating an electronic handbook, which would make it easier for incoming presidents of the General Assembly to have as a quick reference to deal with some situations that recur from time to time. Because you see, the staff of the office is not a permanent staff. Every president of the General Assembly more or less has to assemble a staff. In my case, approximately 52 or 54 people to serve in the office in discrete areas, in international law, in human rights, in international politics, in sustainable development. And these people come from the missions, come from the country delegations in New York, some of them on secondment. So they do not stay. There's only a very small number for whom provision is made to continue year after year. The rest rotate. And so they themselves come to the office as experts in the field, but without the institutional knowledge of what had taken place 2 years ago or 10 years ago, and how it was handled then. That lacuna we're seeking to close now with the publication of the electronic handbook, which we hope to do in a couple of weeks in New York.
And I can imagine people from Trinidad and Tobago saying, yes, it's one of us is a Trinbagonian who's responsible for this, who's at the helm of this. I can imagine people from Woodbrook Sec being even more proud. So with that in mind, I want to ask about your itinerary while you're here, please, because I'm sure everybody will want to get a piece of you to glean some insight.
Well, there's no doubt that I'm looking forward to going to my alma mater. In fact, for me, it's one of the highlights of my coming home. This is the place that helped to shape who I became, nurtured me. I found lifelong friends there, lifelong. I think this year we celebrate 56 years of friendship. That's a rare thing, something to be cherished. And this school, in my view, has never really gotten the recognition it deserves for its contribution to national development. And I say that because I know personally of several high achievers in our society, judges, senior judges, lawyers, businessmen, priests, librarians, information scientists, government accountants, all who have been to Woodbrook Secondary. But you know, as a younger diplomat serving abroad, whenever I went to a public function and was called upon to speak, people would always assume that I had gone to one of the prestige schools, simply because I was able to express myself creditably by the use of language. Well, I learned to do that in Woodbrook Secondary. And so this is, when I mentioned Woodbrook Secondary in my acceptance speech, it was very deliberate, because the message I was sending subliminally is that this is Woodbrook standing in the UN. It's Dennis Francis, yes, but he is a product of Woodbrook. And I'm taking Woodbrook along with me. And so I'm very, very happy to go back there and to do what little I can to motivate these kids. Because success is possible from Woodbrook Secondary.
And on that level of motivation, the last thing I'd want to ask, though, is looking at your experiences, looking at what you've been through, what would you say to a younger person, a younger Dennis Francis, or someone who is thinking now to follow in footsteps like you because they're seeing the range of possibilities that is available to them if they apply and go through a process?
Yes. Well, applying is one thing, but there are certain things that have to happen before you get to the stage of applying. And one of those things, certainly for students, that is extremely important, is to apply themselves diligently to getting the work done, the high school work done, to graduating, and to achieving the best that they can achieve at high school. You know, it's success doesn't happen. To a significant degree, we create our success. Although we don't know for sure, we have no guarantees. We create our success. There's an element of chance, I suppose, yes, and or luck. But being prepared so that when the opportunity presents itself, it's not difficult to accept it or to fit into it is extremely important. And I would urge those kids in Woodbrook Secondary, and not just in Woodbrook Secondary, across the school system, okay, to invest the time and the effort in doing the work. Because in this year, I've traveled far and wide. And in a place like Singapore, for example, the kids go to school for, I think it's about 12 hours a day. Yes. You should hear them speak. That's where the competition is. It's not the person in San Fernando. It's the kids their age in Singapore, and in Vietnam, and in Malaysia, and in China, and in India. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would encourage them to do and to be is to look outwards. We have a tendency in this country to look inwards. And as beautiful as the country is, and as charming as the people are, and with so much potential, success globally requires you to look out. And there are all sorts of opportunities now. We live in an information age. People do not necessarily need to live where they work. Work is now footloose. So you can live in Trinidad and Tobago but be working for a global corporation somewhere else, or live somewhere else and be earning income, some of which you might choose to send back to Trinidad and Tobago. Work is footloose. But getting into that global labor market requires you to be competitive with others who are contending for the same opportunities like you. So be outward looking, go up on the websites of the United Nations, see what vacancies exist, and try to take advantage of those vacancies, because we do need more people out there in these situations, in these agencies. Most of us in the Caribbean are actually underrepresented. And those opportunities are opportunities that I think, in terms of our educational system and the prowess that we demonstrate every year when examination results come out, we are more than capable of performing creditably in those positions. So I encourage them, look outward.
So if you see a massive influx of people from the Caribbean entering the United Nations service, we'll attribute, we won't blame, we'll attribute it to you.
Well, it doesn't matter who you attribute it to, just get it done. And there was a point in time when it happened. There was many, many years ago, under the Director Generalship of Jacques Diouf, the then Director General of the FAO, a number of Caribbean countries sent officers to work in the FAO. So it isn't as if we do not have a history of doing this. We do have a history. But of course, the objective is to prepare, prepare, prepare. That is what will get you through the door.
And you say that, and carries me back to the saying that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So for that, I want to thank you very much, Your Excellency. Expanding our thought processes a bit and sharing a great bit of your insight. We've been speaking with the 78th President of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Dennis Francis, and we want to thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I'm Dike Rostant. Thank you for joining us.